economy was shaky, and government had to provide a strong stimulus to keep growth above 5%. Private investment and consumption were already falling, and our government's capacity for investment had shrunk because of extensive welfare spending and struggles with increasing tax revenues in an economy that was not doing so well. Now, the job of India's policymakers has become far more challenging. According to estimates, our economy has lost more than $5 billion per day every day of the lockdown. After the first 3-week lockdown, the expectations were that India's economic growth in 2020 would be about 3%. But after the second 3-week lockdown, even though partial, expectations have been revised to 1.9% growth. Some global banks are putting India's GDP growth in 2020 at less than 1%. One of the major concerns for our economy is the damage due to demand by the lockdown, which has disrupted incomes of India's huge informal businesses and workers. The flight of global capital is another concern. During the lockdown, India has seen the second largest sell-off by foreign investors after Brazil. However, the good news is that IMF expects the Indian economy to rebound next year with 7.4% GDP growth from a lower base, albeit in the best case scenario. A partial reopening of the Indian economy after 4 weeks of total lockdown has created hope that all the doom and gloom scenarios are exaggerated and our economy can quickly get back to the business of growing fast. Our government has prioritized IT, petroleum refineries, oil, coal, food, and rural industries for reopening. The move is expected to lubricate the economy by restoring our energy supply chain, services exports, digitization, goods mobility, and farm jobs. An important advisory that comes with this resumption is that companies should provide dormitories for workers near the workplace to allow enforcement of geographical containment. The key to India's strong rebound is finance. Most COVID-affected countries have announced massive relief packages, some up to 10% of the GDP, to save businesses and jobs. Many countries are nationalizing private losses by cutting taxes and duties, by paying partial salaries of furloughed workers, and by infusing funds into nationally important companies through debt and equity. IMF has advised governments to provide ample liquidity and ease financial stress of industries, especially small and medium enterprises that employ much of the workforce. Though India lacks the fiscal capacity for extensive support to workers and industry like richer countries, it can and it must create more money and give it out as cheaply as possible. We need a huge boost in demand for manufactured goods. A quick and massive rescue effort will limit the damage to our economy and enable its swift rebound. So that's all I had to say this evening. Now we shall follow the same template as we did last time. Our two resources are Mr. Singhania and Mr. Pai. After both address us, we shall open up for questions. Like I said earlier, and Rekha has also mentioned, participants should post their questions in the chat mode to any speaker or all the speakers to answer. May I now request Mr. Harsh Pati Singhania, Senior Vice President, AIMA, to address us.
I think let's start with Mohan. I can't see Mr. Singhania here.
Hi, Rekha.
Oh, he's here. He's here. Sorry about that.
I'm trouble entering the arena. Thank you, Ashish. I will log off. Thank you. Yes, I'm there now.
Yeah, Harsh.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Sorry, I was having difficulty logging in, but anyway, now I'm there. So you want to start off with some remarks and
yes, please.
Mr. President. No, you're making the remarks first. Right?
I've already made the remarks. I don't know. Yeah. So you're going next after me.
Sorry, my apologies. Good evening, everybody. And I'm delighted to be here at this session and it's an interesting one that we are doing this webinar now instead of seminars. And we have, a lot of people, I'm told, tonight. And so really speaking, I would rather not make very long remarks in terms of, what is the situation with COVID, what will happen after that, and so on. So let me just say this, that, we are all aware of what sort of COVID has happened. But my only two bits on the COVID thing is that what I understand, and there may be people in the medical profession who understand this much more than I do, but I have maybe a simplistic and maybe a wrong view as well, which is essentially that, it is a virus which in the course of our life, a lot of us will contract. And like we contract other viruses. So for the able-bodied people, there is people who are not too old, who don't have comorbidity symptoms, or people who are not too weak, our bodies should hopefully be able to process this like we would do with any other virus, and we move on. The fear is that, there is no vaccine, so we can't be vaccinated. But let us remember one thing. For even other viruses, unless there are vaccines that you've taken before, I don't think that we really have medicines. It is more for bacterial infections, etc. So really, when we get a virus and the doctor gives us some medicine, it is more, let us say, to see that, paracetamol, so we don't have great amount of discomfort, or some antihistamine, or if it is a stomach bug, something from there. And so actually, we must understand, at least I would understand that at some point in time, we could contract it and we'll have to go through with this. Of course, the only way to deal with this has been the whole issue of social distancing, and therefore people will not actually, and this whole lockdown thing. So I wouldn't want to comment too much on the lockdown itself, because that is something which is happened. We are already in the midst of it, and most of us are looking forward to when this starts easing up. As we all know, it was to be from the 15th, and then that has got extended, but there has been limited activity which is there. My point really here is that this partial sort of opening up, while correct, is a tough one to implement, because today everything is so intertwined, all business, the entire supply chain, and actually all facets of life are terribly intertwined. And because of that, it is difficult, to my mind, to be able to do this in a smooth manner. So all of us have to bear with that. And the whole aspect on the fallout, the economic fallout of all this is very, very large, and is very difficult to estimate. There are all kinds of estimates made, and I wouldn't even dare to put too many, but we've all read that IMF talks in terms of a global economy decline by 3% as against a 3.3% growth. Indian economy, people are talking about 1.9%. There are some others who believe that if we manage to stay in neutral territory, we will do well and not really go into negatives, and so on and so forth. There is one estimate that I came across that in India, the per day loss due to lockdown is about 10,000 crores a day. Now, don't ask me where it came from, but I got it from somewhere. So it is really the basic point is that it is a huge, huge economic cost. And not only India, really globally, the cost is, globally the impact economically is very large. So nobody has the right answer. Nobody knows which way it will go. And in terms of the opening up, and we'll all have to, if I may use an expression, swim with the river or swim with the stream. In this case, we really don't know. But we all have to be adaptive. We have to be agile. And I think as management, the basic point is you can start up an enterprise after lockdown. I can say that in our group, we have already started some of our businesses. But the challenge that we have in front of us is not the starting of an enterprise. The challenge is really the front end. We are talking about the demand scenario. So I can produce from a factory, but there has to be somebody to buy. And that involves the end customer. That involves the entire distribution chain, the dealer, the distributor, and their cash position. How ready and open and able are they for business? And of course, the logistics side, both in and out. So it is a complex issue, and that is why I said everything is intertwined. But the focus is really, to my mind, on demand creation, depending on the sector that one is in. And it could be a service sector, which might be very different. Look at the hospitality sector. It is not easy. And this is where we bring this whole issue to say, corporates and companies and enterprises need to work in unconventional ways and think of out-of-box solutions to create or to fulfill demand. So in some of our businesses, let's say we have a consumer business as well, where we have been trying to explore tie-ups with other delivery agencies and service providers, whereby we can get our goods to the customer. On the other hand, you also have the issue of how much, there has to be some kind of support from government and policymakers. So banks have allowed some amount of flexibility in terms of working capital, some extra lines of credit, what should I say, the deferment and moratorium by 3 months of interest and principal. But I would personally, my personal guess is that we would require much more than this. On a policy front, the government would want you to pay your workers while you've had zero revenue on the top line. Now, this is a tough situation. Some people may be able to absorb it, but a large number of people, particularly MSMEs and a whole bunch of others, will have great difficulty. And that is from business and industry, we have been talking about saying that the government should support this. In other countries, the government has come out, or different governments have come out with reimbursement or supporting to some extent wage costs and other costs that enterprises have incurred. So there is a lot that needs to be done on both ends. As far as management is concerned, AIMA is concerned, AIMA would be happy, I would suppose, with, of course, and I'm sure the president might have mentioned this, that or otherwise, that working with the local management associations to see how we can help in digitization efforts, in other efforts of learning from each other in terms of best practices, what other companies are doing. How do you safely open up enterprises? Some kind of SOPs that each companies have, and AIMA can become a sort of some repository of sharing knowledge and information around some of these areas, and all those kinds of things. But I think the basic thing for management at this point is to be very adaptive and to have the ability to think out of the box. I think as management people and as management professionals, that is what we need to do. The second thing which I would submit is that we have a great responsibility to, in this difficult situation, to lead our teams and encourage them. They are battling every day, and we also have obviously expectations, and we keep demanding. I know I keep demanding with my team to say, oh, we must find a way to do this, we must do this, we must do that. While that is correct, to help to think out of the box, but I think we also need to acknowledge the tremendous pressures they are going through on the professional front, as well as personally, being confined to home with their families, with their kids. And I think this is where leadership can really stand up and show that we are all together, have some degree of empathy, show that we are together, lead, inspire people is equally important. A third thing that we have also been doing is, while this lockdown was there, not everybody is equally occupied. So what we have done is we have tried to keep our people engaged through various communications, through allowing them the ability to upskill themselves, learn new skills. And the good news is that a lot of this is available for free, and it's all available online. So lots of different things. We've also encouraged them to pursue. We can't do that for them, but encourage them to say, okay, pursue some other hobbies that you have. Do something in terms of whatever you can. And so people have received this in a proper fashion. As far as manufacturing enterprises is concerned, also, and I'm sure it applies to any other business, whether it's service, is that even down to the worker levels, we communicate to say this is what we are doing. And as an enterprise, what we are doing for the community, and saying how we are helping people. So this keeps people motivated, this keeps people engaged, and that is equally important. But it is very clear that whenever opening up happens, for some it has already started, some it will happen later, it is going to be extremely uncertain. And at the point of repetition, I would say that we need to be very agile and adept. We have to rethink our business models also, whether it is in terms of digitization. There may be some areas of our work which we could, in the long term, actually do from home. Now, do from home does not mean that everything is work from home. There can be parts which are at work from home. Some people who will be coming into an office daily need not come into an office daily, but could come into office for a shorter duration or for fewer days in the month, and work from home. This Zoom call like we are doing has also taught us that there are several, there's a lot of travel that we do, and a lot of meetings and communication that we conduct, which we can actually conduct using technology. And we need not spend the time. It's not a matter of money alone, but when you travel, there is also time spent. And whether some jobs can be done in that manner. Also, reviewing supply chains, sourcing arrangements, a whole lot of other things which come to rethink our business model. So, I'd leave it right now here, and we'll get into the Q&A. I've spoken a fair amount, but these are some thoughts I have in terms of, this whole issue and how we can try and tackle and deal with it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Senior Vice President. I really like the fact that you gave very practical examples, what it takes to reopen factories, especially demand creation. I think a lot of people in my industry or in manufacturing are also facing similar issues when the final retail outlets are closed. And how do you get all that started, even if they are in rural India and even if they are in the green zones? You also, when you talked about factories, on one side you have the retail side, on the other side you have our vendors. And our vendors also, especially component manufacturers for many industries, they also have to start. They also have to start safely. And someone like us in the middle, we have to ensure that, when customers order, we deliver them of the right quality as they expect and on time. And therefore, it's going to be quite a tightrope walk, managing between vendors as well as with customers. The other thing you brought out, the human angle. How do you keep your employees engaged? How do you upgrade employees while you have this chance? And also how you tell them that, while we may be in problems, we are still doing good for all our neighbors, people who may not be as in the same situation as us. So thank you so much for bringing all of that out. May I now request our past president, Mr. Mohandas Pai, to address us.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's good to be here and to talk to all of you. We have heard the two eminent people talk. Let me start by giving you an overview of what is going to happen in the world possibly over the next 2 or 3 years. My personal belief is that this is an inflection point in world history and in world economic history. Look around the world today. The entire Western world is economically devastated. There has been a lock-in in the US for more than 30 days. Large parts of the economy are shut. $2 trillion of stimulus has been announced. The UK has announced 15% of GDP as a stimulus, 365 billion pounds. Every country in Europe has issued a stimulus. They're all shut down. They are trying to take care of human lives, and economic activity has come to a standstill. If you look at Japan, Japan is now slowly undergoing a shutdown, primarily because when Japan announced an emergency, their law will not allow them to force citizens to stay inside. It's only an advisory. But they've issued a massive stimulus of about 20% of GDP, nearly $1 trillion. And China went through a stimulus, and also China went through the crisis of the virus. And China has now seen a 6% decline in GDP in the first quarter of this calendar year. So my personal view is this is an inflection point for the world, and the world will never be the same economically from now onwards. I'll explain why as we go along. The global supply chain interacts with all countries. China is the largest exporter of the world, the largest importer of the world, the largest foreign exchange reserves of $4.5 trillion, etc. The entire world depends on China, more so the Southeast Asian countries, Japan, more so Europe, Europe, US, etc. Even India depends on China because we have a trade deficit of something like about $80 billion with China. And I think a large part of our trade is with China. Now, the global supply chain is all interlinked with China. And when China shut down, manufacturing and all activities around the world were shut down largely, primarily because they could not get the parts. The United States depends for 90% of its medicine outside, 45% on India. For the United States, on most things, they depend on China too. And this has now led to alarm around the industry. So in future, we are going to see a reordering of the global supply chain. Western countries will not depend entirely on China. You must remember that China is a $15 trillion economy in an $82 trillion global economy, and second largest in the world, with America being at 21 trillion. Now, when a very large economic player uses the global supply chain to grow and can no longer use that because the world will shift, we'll see a massive shift of manufacturing and goods from China to Southeast Asia. Some of it may come to India and back to the home countries in the US and in Europe. That means there'll be a reordering of the global supply chain, and globalization to some extent will be in retreat. This will have an impact in all industries all around the world. We have to study this impact. What China may do, as China's economy is hurt, they may try dumping. So China, we may dump the goods across all countries in Southeast Asia and in India. So we need to be careful that China does not use this opportunity where global economy is shrinking to dump its goods and services. The immediate casualty of this global breakdown, economic breakdown, has been the oil industry. We just saw with disbelief that oil got into negative territory. They're trying to close the May contract at a discount of $37. That means the sellers are paying the buyers $37, just to make sure they conclude the contract. Now there are many contracts that are pending, and they say that about 70% or 80% of the global storage of oil is already full. The demand for oil globally is 100 million barrels a day. There's been a 30% decline in global demand for oil because of China's economy shutting down, the whole world economy shutting down, and this 30% means oil prices are coming down. Add to it, Saudi Arabia had a fight with Russia and said that they're going to dominate because the United States had become the largest producer of oil in the world using shale gas, and the Saudis and the Russians had to cut production. So they wanted to reduce the output of oil. When Russia refused, Saudi Arabia said we'll increase production to 12, 13 million barrels a day because the cost of oil is very, very low. That also added to the oil glut. So there's an oil glut, there is a decline. They all got together and said we will cut production by about 10 million barrels a day, but that's inadequate. And it basically means that the production of oil has to come down substantially. Now, oil was a $4 trillion economy at about $60 a barrel. Now, when the oil economy comes to 25, 30%, $30 a barrel, that means about $2 to $2.5 trillion, the global GDP will come down. Purchasing power will shift from the oil producing countries to the oil consuming countries, and shipping and all other activities that are there connected with oil will be hit, including maybe remittances from India. So remittances to India. So I think that is going to have a major impact on the world economy over the next 2 years. For oil to come back to a semblance of demand and supply, maybe 10, 15 million barrels have to be cut for this year. And even in the next year, oil may not come back to 45, 50. So we could see low oil prices for the next 1 year and maybe even thereafter. The impact on the global economy will be very, very severe. For example, in the United States, many of the oil companies which pump shale are getting into receivership and bankruptcy. So major industry in the world is already hurt. Tourism is hurt. Tourism is reportedly the largest after oil and maybe the largest before oil. And all around the world, tourism has been shut down for the last 45 days. International flights have been cancelled. Major world airlines were going to bankruptcy. The capacity in the global airlines were diminished by 25, 30%, even if they come off. And all airlines are asking for a bailout from the government. And that means for the next 12 months, maybe more, global travel will come down. Global tourism will come down. Hospitality will come down. And the employment of people on this, maybe 10, 12% of the global workforce, there'll be a deep kind of hurt. Airlines will be hurt, airports will be hurt, tourism will be hurt, event managers will be hurt, conference people will be hurt, etc. And this will have a major impact on consumption as we go along. The next important point, what you must understand, is a permanent change in people's behavior. Now, we have seen when people have been logged in for 30, 45 days, everybody has gone digital. The consumption of data on the internet has gone up by 40, 50% or more all around the world. And that means our habits, when they change over 15 days, maybe we'll report back. When they change over 30 days, we may change. When they change over 45 days, they definitely will change. So you look at everybody around the world today, most people are ordering the goods on the internet. They're seeing entertainment through Netflix or other OTT on their screens at home. They're not going out. The cinemas are shut. Now they're getting education through the web and they're seeing online courses. Now we're all talking to each other through Zoom. We're not sitting in a conference hall and talking to each other. We're talking with Zoom and it works very well in the comfort of our homes. So you're going to see a change in human behavior. And we see a change in consumer behavior. It means the existing business models where you have a physical location will change. The banking industry, which is very, very large, will see at least shrinkage of bank branches, more digital work going on, and office blocks and offices will see 25, 30, 40% of people permanently working from home. In the US and other countries, work from home is already a large percentage, but I think it will shrink. And in the Western countries where growth normally is 2 to 3%, the utilization of in real estate will come down dramatically and high cost location will go vacant. It also means malls, supermarket, retail outlets all over, especially in the United States, will possibly get into bankruptcy. And that is another big issue that will happen because retail is a very, very big employer. So when people's habits changes, then we have to make sure that our business models also change. The next issue, big issue, is going to be the amount of the stimulus that all countries are giving. The United States is giving a stimulus of $2 trillion, all coming through borrower. The UK is 360 billion, or average about 300 billion is loan guarantees. We don't know the extent. So we can say out of $82 trillion all around the world, maybe $10 trillion will be the stimulus that will go into the markets. That means the interest rates have already come to 0.25% are negative in the United States. It will be negative in the whole of Europe for a larger part. Before this COVID crisis, out of $36 trillion of government bonds from the world, $18 trillion were already negative interest rates. So the world will have surplus capital, and this capital is sloshed around. And this means that interest rates globally will be low, and that money could go anywhere where there are returns. And any economy performing may see large inflows of hot money coming. And this will have a major impact on how the global financial markets are configured. And we must remember, financial markets drive asset prices. So we're going to see a change in the way the financial markets work. And all this will result in the lowering of savings. We have seen consumption come around all the world. It means people are living off savings for about nearly 2 months. It may go on for the next 2 or 3 months. In the US, already 25 million people out of the 160 million people do not have jobs. They're going on social welfare. And we'll see large joblessness even in Europe. And we will see it around the world. I'll talk about India later. When there is large joblessness, there's the advent of technology. Many of the jobs may not come back. So we do not know how consumption will be impacted. But what is certain is, in this year, calendar year, we're going to see global growth become negative. As IMF says, it will be 3% negative from 3% positive. That is a shift of 6%. And 6% on $82 trillion is about nearly $5 trillion. $5 trillion is a lot of money getting off the global economy. And it may take 2-3 years to come back to the same figure, if at all. So this is a very, very big impact, which will lead to the destruction of many industries, change in human behavior, influx of huge amount of capital in the financial markets, much lower interest rates, reduced returns on savings for most people globally. Now, what about India? How is it going to affect India? Now, let us look at our economy and understand what the impact is going to be. 43% of Indians depend upon agriculture, which is 15% of GDP as per the GDP calculations. Now, this may grow this year at 3% because we may have a good monsoon. The Rabi crop this year is supposed to be a record crop. So agriculture may grow at 3% or maybe even 4%. Even if it grows at 4% on 15%, is 0.6% of GDP. Manufacturing is 25%. In manufacturing, the April month is gone. May, there may not be much. June, it may not do anything. So manufacturing could be negative, maybe minus 2.5, minus 10% negative. That means on GDP, it will be minus 2.5%. And then services are about 63% of 65% of GDP. And services has been deeply hurt. In services, there are many components. Trade and retail is one component which has been hurt. And then you have personal services, real estate. The real estate industry, the largest industry, it has been hurt, and many real estate companies may get into bankruptcy. And then you'll see that retail has been hurt very badly because more shops are closed. And this year, much of the retail consumption may come down. So we could see services which normally grow 7 to 8%, maybe grow at 2 or 3%, if at all. And I think the range of economic growth today is around 1.8% to maybe minus 3%. And my prediction and my view is it could be minus for this year. It'll be minus for this year because a large part of whatever government spends will go into supporting poor people. Yes, consumption may go up, but it's too little. The destruction of manufacturing, retail, and consumption, people dipping into savings means people will be cautious. They're not going to buy so many cars. Even though China says that after such a crisis like SARS, people went and bought more cars. And Maruti chairman says that they expect car sales to increase. It might, we don't know, but I'm doubtful. We're going to see lesser travel and we're going to see lesser tourism because people may not have discretionary spending. People will be cautious about buying homes unless the interest rates come down and the price of real estate comes down. And the czar of real estate from Bombay has said real estate should come down 20-25%. But this year is going to be a bad year for everybody. Now, what is the solution for this bad year? The government has given a stimulus of 1.7 lakh crores, primarily to help people at the bottom of the pyramid, which is very important because these are people who live day to day and they require sustenance. Nobody in India should starve or want for food. I think the government has done well, but much more has to be done. The second is government has to pay back all its dues, income tax refunds, GST refunds, and giving 14% guaranteed GST to the states. Maybe 1 lakh crore has to be given back, and then another 50,000 crore for loan guarantees. Now, most industry is in a position where their entire financial system is stuck up. They're not able to get the receivables. They don't have money to pay the payables. They may not have drawing limit because circulation has stopped. If money circulation stops for industry, I think this will be a major challenge to start again. So we require credit. The RBI has opened up the financial market, released 6.5 to 7 lakh crores of liquidity into the market by enabling banks to borrow money from the money market where they are lending. But the key issue is whatever money has come, the banks have put back 6.3 lakh crores into deposit with RBI. So the RBI has reduced the reverse repo, but banks will keep money there because banks are not lending, because banks are scared of NPA. The State Bank of India chairman has increased the working capital by 10% for most of its good companies. Hopefully other banks will follow, but that is totally inadequate. And I think it's very important for banks and the government to understand that this quarter, April, May, June, may see only 20-25% of normal revenues. The next quarter may see maybe 40-45%. Any recovery, about 60% of normal revenues may only come in the third quarter, if at all. So I think it's very important that there's liquidity given to MSMEs and larger companies. Not the AAA companies and larger companies can access credit. Money can be cheaper. Smaller companies, since banks hesitate to lend, we need a credit guarantee scheme for the government to be given to them. Then there's the issue of the middle class. What about jobs? Are we going to see jobs? Let me give you some data, and this is my personal opinion. The ESI and PF have 8 crore people who are employed to get a regular salary. The total number is about 8 crores, out of which 4 to 4.5 crores is contract labor. And I think a large number of them have been asked to go because people don't want to pay contract labor when work is not there and they don't have the liquidity. And I think many more will also be asked to go if the lockdown goes ahead. It's easy to ask them to let go because they'll not make a noise. They understand this. And that's why there are so many migrants wanting to go out of Delhi, out of Mumbai and other places. The people employed here don't have much of savings, but they like to go back to their hometown because they feel they can survive in the villages or small towns with their family. So we're going to see a large decline in work for the contract labor part of the effective work. The government sector will remain. Government employs 2.5 crore people, 2.5 crore employees, state government, central government, parastatals. That means 10 crore people will get a regular salary from the government paid out of taxes or government borrowing. The government has 2 crore pensioners, 2 into 2, 4 crore people will be there. So 14 crore people out of all population, the entire population of 137 crore may not see any decline in the income. Their consumption may remain as it is. They're the lucky people who are employed by the government, paid out of our taxes, and out of borrowings, the government doesn't have taxes. So we're going to see large scale, redeployment of labor and many people going back to their hometown. What about the middle class? The middle class who are employed could be maybe 4 crores, maybe a little bit more, and their 10 to 20% will be laid off because of many reasons. One, many of the MSMEs and smaller companies don't have money to put on the payroll. They're not getting credit despite the RBI opening up, despite the RBI saying we'll give it to the NBFCs, because most of the NBFCs may use it to pay back borrowings. And of course, the business is not coming back to normal. So companies will have to, companies are small firms will have to incur losses, and that will have an impact. So I think they too are going to feel the impact, and they too require some support. So I think this year is going to be a bad year for most people. Now, before I come to the last part where maybe I share some thought what we should all do, but let us say what we need from the government right now. The government has given economic stimulus for the bottom 60% of society. Now we need an economic stimulus from the government where they could pay back all tax refund, GST refund, pay back the states what money is due, then pay back the contractors who have done work for NHAI. There is 60,000 crores of disputes with NHAI, and much more money has to be paid. The railways have to pay. They have to pay the health services for giving health to the public, and government has not paid. So government has not paid a lot of bills. I think Mint worked out that any point of time, government owns 3 lakh to 4 lakh crores. If the government is able to pay back all this money, the firm's money will come back. There'll be some kind of liquidity for them. Next, the government will have to possibly start spending massively on infrastructure. We need a massive reconstruction budget from the government, maybe spending maybe 5 to 6 lakh crores as against 3.5 to 4 lakh crores this year, financed by borrowing, maybe from overseas borrowing, payment for building roads, building railway lines, and helping build ports and many things else. So the government is able to spend on infrastructure in a massive way. That money will kickstart the economy, and that will flow through and create employment in the infrastructure sector. And hopefully, all those who depend on infrastructure like steel, etc., steel and cement, etc., will get some business. Then the government has to look at the real estate industry. The real estate industry of agriculture is reportedly the largest employer. And here, most firms don't have liquidity, borrowing the top maybe 10, 20% of the firm. Government will have to go in for loan rescheduling, and maybe the banks have to take a haircut, and maybe the real estate companies will have to cut prices by 20% to sell and to get liquidity, and a large bailout package for them to save that industry and provide jobs is essential. So there has to be many things done by the government. If the government does it this year, next year, that is 21, 22 could be a good year, because all the spending that comes out of this year will increase consumption level, will increase the confidence of people, behavior may change, and we could get new businesses come in. So we have to invest now in a bad year with public money, so that the good year next year can be a good year, and from then we can grow. And we are able to demonstrate that we are going to invest, we're going to spend on infrastructure, and we're going to make sure next year is be a growth year. Then money will come in from overseas. India could have a surplus money and much lower interest rates. Government has understood very well, as also RBI, that interest rates have to come down to spur on investment. Now, what about all of us in industry? What should we do? Now, my personal view is all of us should go into survival mode. Survival mode means we must look at our financials, our business models to make sure that in a crisis where our business could be only 60% of a normal year's business will be survived. We must cut fixed costs. We must reshape our businesses. We must make sure we don't lay off people, whatever happens, because, if you start laying off people, then I think it'll be difficult to get back good people. And we have a moral obligation in a crisis, because this is not a normal economic crisis. This is a health crisis, and people require that money to keep the body and soul together. So maybe cut salaries for the top management and make sure everybody gets a survival wage as the first charge on the company. Cut unnecessary costs and try to make sure that they're able to survive with 60% revenues for the next 12 months. Second, try to raise capital or sell some assets even at a distress to become much more liquid. I think becoming much more liquid is very important. Maybe go to the banks and ask them to enhance your working capital, because for most of the good firms, it is not a question of solvency, it's a question of liquidity. The third is relook at our revenue models and our business models. Now the world has gone fully digital. Payments are going fully digital, and then people's behavior is also going digital. That means they'll buy digitally through the portals, and physical locations may come down. The e-commerce companies will dominate because they got capital, they got the supply chain, and they got everything else. So we must try to make sure that we are able to go digital, and we are able to use the digital media to sell and try to reduce our costs. Next is we must look at all our internal processes and become much more productive. Unless today we're able to do 2 times the work with the workforce that all of us have, I don't think we can compete in future. Let us remember, when the world economy changes, when the world economy comes down, China gets hurt, China is going to start dumping. And we have traders in India who will buy from China or from any other country routed from China and sell in India to make a profit. You cannot stop them beyond a point. But the key thing is we must become productive. We must try to reduce internal processes, reduce friction to business, invest in technology, and become productive so that we can each be 2 times productive than we are. And that means people who are non-performers, etc., must be let go. Good performers must be retained. Try to keep as many employees as possible. The next point for manufacturers is when the global supply chain shifts from China and goes to other countries, the little bit bigger companies and the smaller and much bigger companies to re-examine their models and try to make sure that they are able to compete globally. Look at the world as a marketplace. Look at exports as a much bigger area of operations for you. Get in good manufacturing practices. Automate your factories to make sure productivity is higher, the quality is higher, and consistency is very much higher. Because today with robotics and automated manufacturing, the cost of the plant and equipment in most countries is the same, and the labor component is much smaller. So you're able to automate your plants, use 3D printing, run robots in your plants, and increase production, lower your cost, and look at exports as a means you can possibly capture markets that are looking for other source of supply away from China. I think this is important. And lastly, I think the last point is we must look at business from a 2 to 3 years perspective, look at business with a globalized eye, look at business in a much bigger way and try to tackle the global market, increase productivity, be frugal, tighten our belts, keep our hopes, and keep going. because in this crisis, the people are going to change. The people are smart enough to change, will always survive and grow, because as Darwin said, is not the biggest of the species or the most powerful of the species that survive. It is the smartest of the species. So this is an inspection point where the world will change, India will change, all of us have to change, and we have to change dramatically in the short term. What would happen in 5 to 7 years will happen in the next 3 years. And I think it is the call to AIMA and all our professional managers to relearn what we learned in management and put it into practice, strategize, and look forward with hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohan. That was very good advice. You spoke about so many topics, whether it, starting out with how the world is at an inflection point. Question is whether it's going to be West versus China. There's so many WhatsApp messages. I don't know how true they are about class action suits being uh, started against China. You talked about reordering of the global supply chain and the opportunities. I think India has a huge opportunity to try and replace China. And I believe that with our large population, there will be an attempt for many countries to come here. And I hope that our government will put in whatever needs to be done to make India attractive. That being said, I was also happy to see that government of India stepped in and not allowed neighboring countries to invest while Indian valuations are low. I think that has been a very good step by our government. And you spoke about how business models are going to change and how what we need to do going forward to ensure that we survive. Because I think it's a question of survival. Our grandparents probably had some of the toughest jobs. We don't. I mean, some of our grandparents are not around, but they did go through a Great Depression. They also went through a world war, and a lot of lives were reordered at that time. So with that, let me take the first question that I saw coming in, which was to you, Mohan. How can a startup work post-COVID, and what are the basic steps an organization can take up in India, especially MSMEs and organizations in the rural sector?
Well, I would say I would start with talking about startups, then go to the MSMEs. I think the startups have to get into survival mode. We have 250 startup among our 14 funds. We have made analysis of all of them. 10% will go down; they will not survive. And for the rest, we told them to cut costs deeply and make sure they keep their employees, make sure they improve their technology, and make sure they become more productive, and make sure that the money lasts for at least 9 to 10 months, because it's difficult to raise money in this particular way. And they must come with an economic model where they'll survive and they will be viable as early as possible and stop losing money. Because the startup industry has got a fetish for valuation, where they think that you blow up more money, you can raise more money, get a higher valuation. The valuation becomes an end in itself, not sustainability. And I think it's important to be sustainable, because there is no cheap money anymore. I don't think people are going to throw around money for the next 1 or 2 years at least, unless greed takes over, and greed will take over. And you have to wait for greed to take over when you may get good valuation. So I think you got to be in survival, you got to do this. And as far as MSMEs are concerned, if you are into manufacturing, you have to be more productive. You have to improve your quality. You have to automate much more. You have to look at the supply chain costs and try to reduce them. And you must come out with some innovative products, possibly reduce waste. There's so many things, so many ways to become much more efficient. All of you may be surprised that the Chinese worker is 2.5, 3 times more productive than the Indian worker. And you'll be very surprised that a German is paid maybe 10 times what an Indian worker is paid, and the German is more productive than an Indian, because they use automation, they're very productive, they don't gossip at work, they don't waste materials. So I think it is productivity and labor productivity that works. There are 2 things that define a good corporation: capital productivity and labor productivity. That means capital has to be used spacely. You have to earn your cost of capital and surpluses, and labor has to be productive. And the productivity will translate into higher wages. And higher wages cannot come just because you're able to turn around a profit, or you are an inefficient producer in a market which pays your price. Because with freer imports and China dumping its goods, we're going to see a tougher competition. So MSMEs too should tighten their belts, use cash sparingly, cut out the waste, become productive and reorient their business. If both are able to do this, I think, they can survive. And when the economy turns, you will grow very, very rapidly.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. I think that for the last few years, MSMEs have been under tremendous pressure uh, from companies that buy from them. But I think that since it's going to be a matter of survival, there's going to be even more pressure going forward. The next question is from Ashok Jain of Meerut. He would like to know what happens to automotive component imports from China, or will China invest in India to make in India? Mr. Singhania, would you like to answer this?
Sure. A lot of the uh, stuff has to be played out, so it is very difficult to say really. But there is no doubt that China has been part of the global supply chain. And I sometimes slightly different view from what will this entire anti-China sentiment at this point in time about this being President Trump went on record in saying this is a Chinese virus, and he repeated that. Now there is this sentiment that China has caused trouble to the world, so we should look at other sources. Well, emotion is one part, but at the end of the day, money speaks in business. This is my personal view. And what might happen is that while this will remain for a while, this feeling, but as if if China is able to deliver products at the lowest cost with delivery that is consistent and dependable, and a quality to match for the needs, China can very much come back in the game. So for other countries, let me take this on in a different light. If India, and we have talked a lot about the opportunities that can come to India coming from this kind of thing. If India wants to take advantage of this, we have to fix a lot of our factor input costs. We have to see that we are able to deliver consistently at the desired price at a desired price by the customer, and we have to see that our quality matches. If we can, then certainly we can gain from the opportunity. If we can't, mere sentiment and emotion is not going to do so. So that is where several countries like Vietnam and many of the other countries in Asia are trying to do things. So, auto components, we will have to see. There may be a greater development of local manufacturing and some of this. So that is where I think, really speaking, that is how it is going to really play out.
Thank you. I for one, believe that, after everyone starts coming out of this pandemic, any job would be welcome and any investment would be welcome. And if tomorrow China decides to invest in India to make auto components, I believe that government of India will welcome that investment like it would welcome investment from any other part of the world. So an investment will be good if it creates jobs. Mr. Pai, do you have any comment? You're on mute.
China is definitely coming to India. They've taken over the General Motors company, and I know for sure that many Chinese electric vehicle companies are planning to come to India because the Chinese market is shrinking. They see India as a growing market, especially in electric vehicles, and they see India as a growing market with expensive cars. So they got cars which can be cheaper. They will use India's auto components because auto components are very competitive. The auto components, I think, exports some $20-30 billion, which is very, very good. So I think, competition will intensify. And like it happened in the mobile industry, government came out with a phased manufacturing plan for the mobile industry. As a result, India manufactures 230 million mobile phones with a 30% value add. 30% value add because the printed circuit boards are now being made. And that means the backward integration of other electronic components will happen. Now in the auto industry, there is very good backward integration, right from steel to components to assembly to robots, etc. And in electric vehicles, there is a limited extent because we don't have the batteries. The first battery plant is coming up. So I think the Chinese will come in a big way. And this will be the battleground between the Chinese, the Indians, the Japanese, and the Koreans, because the Korea is also shifting, right? Sanjay? I think
Yeah.
all four are here. All four are here. Now we got to see, because Maruti is very well entrenched, and Toyota has to grow a bit, but they got resources. Hyundai is very well entrenched in India. The Mahindras are there; they need to scale up. The Tatas are not doing very well. So I think with the Chinese coming in, they will try to expand the market. So it's going to be interesting. But there'll be a big global fight here, and India could be an export base for Europe, for Africa, and the Middle East.
Thank you. The next question is from Ajit Vora. He says, oil is minus, will India benefit? Oil is minus in the futures market, and I think it's US futures market where it is minus. But that being said, if most of the people stay at home and work,
there's no consumption.
That's no one wants to go to the office to work. Transportation will still need oil, transportation of goods, but a large amount of personal vehicles may not move in cities. And India obviously will benefit going forward. But to what extent is a big question mark. Anyone else?
Sanjay, can I come in, Harsh here? I think you were right. I mean, the India, I would put a different spin to it. When we are talking in terms, the first answer is absolutely India will gain from this low oil prices, because we are a very large oil consumer and importer, where we have really the majority comes from imports. But this is one avenue to alleviate the government. When we are talking, one also talked saying that the government needs to support for the sake of jobs, not for the sake of business, but for the sake of jobs. A lot of money, a substantial amount of money could come out of lower oil prices, where the government of India would make a big saving. So I think that's an important factor.
Yeah. Mr. Pai, there's a question specifically for you, I think, though it doesn't say that. I think you will be best suited to answer this. How will COVID-19 affect education and skill development in India?
I think it'll affect education in a very big way, because most of the middle class, and that could be 20-25% of all school-going children, and maybe 40-45% of all college-going young people, most of the middle class has understood that digital education is the way to go. Because digital education gives you access to good content. It gives you access to good content in a format that you understand, is not expensive. It does asynchronous learning, and it also gives you an ability to assess yourself on a continuous basis. That's why Baiju, which had about 3 million subscribers, suddenly saw 6 million more subscribers. Now I think there'll be a permanent change in habits by people. So there will be offline, online education, and all schools will have to shift to a larger part of online education, where content will be sourced from many companies. And even in education too, in higher education too, I think online education will become a larger part. That means the classroom very soon will reorient in higher education to case studies, to discussions, to problem-solving skills, etc. Whereas content and many other portions can be done online. And even in schools, I think pedagogy will change, at least for the bigger schools. Now we have to make sure the government schools, which are 60% of India, also benefit from this. So we are talking to government to request them to bring in a large-scale digitization program, where children in class 4 onwards get a digital tablet with content, so they are not left out of the race. But I think education as a whole will see greater digitization, greater online use, and I think will change in the next 2 to 5 years.
Thank you. This time we not only have participants on Zoom, we also have participants from YouTube and Facebook. So we'll take some of those questions. Mr. Singhania, the first one for you. How to attract companies that are likely to lead the exodus from China? This is by Mohan Govind.
Sorry, I couldn't get the question.
The question is, how can India attract companies that are likely to go out of China?
Okay. So basically, I would think that there are several things. One is that, of course, the very fundamental thing is that we, along that means industry and government, together have to woo some of those corporations, meet with their CEOs, meet with their senior people. This was done in the past, long ago, when India wanted FDI. But that is one phase. The more important thing is we have to create a conducive environment and an ecosystem for businesses to function efficiently with the least amount of interference, red tape, etc. And as Mohan was mentioning earlier, productivity out of those enterprises will have to be high. Now, whether it is labor productivity, whether it is the entire supply chain. So at the end of the day, for any business to go anywhere in the globe, what do they look for? They look for a place where they can manufacture competitively, of the right quality, and deliver to their customers at the right price, and yet make money. That is why you have global supply chains today. Otherwise, in the past, 100 years ago, you largely had businesses that were, local to countries or continents as far as Europe was concerned. Today, if Mr. Kirloskar is likely to source something coming out of China or maybe coming somewhere else, or his European operations will source something from here, it obviously means despite the transport and the other uncertainties, the product or the component is cheaper and reliable. To produce it locally will be more expensive. So at the end of the day, if you bring it back, India has to offer a competitive landscape for business. And it doesn't matter whether that investment comes from China or comes from an Indian enterprise.
Thank you. Another question from YouTube.
Sanjay, can I make a point?
Of course.
Sanjay, my belief is major Indian companies have to learn to be contract manufacturers. When people shift from Japan, they don't have to come and invest plant and machinery and run the factory. They can get local Indian enterprises, have a JV, put in a little bit of capital, and ask them to manufacture and use their brand and export using their brand. Because please remember, in America, Apple only has contract manufacturing. Contract manufacturer may not make much money, but in manufacturing, the money could be bigger because you will learn that, how to run an automated factory. You will learn how to use efficient supply chain, how to use technology, how to get higher technology. And the outside investor doesn't have to invest so much of capital. So I think for existing manufacturers and industries, there's a golden opportunity for them to talk to the big players, particularly in Japan and maybe in Korea, because they're getting decimated by the Chinese. I just read the Chinese are dominating the chip industry, have beaten Samsung, and some Samsung factories are closing down because they can't compete. So I think it's important for big Indian industries to come. And Indian industries know how to set up plans, how to invest in India. I think that's not very difficult. So I think this time the private sector has to play a much, much bigger role to look at the globe and export using their own brand, using their own manufacturing, and collaborating with the Japanese in case they don't have the technology to tackle the global market.
Yeah, and contract manufacturing can also create a large number of jobs.
Absolutely. And if you look at China, contract manufacturing enable them to build the skills, get the capital, run their own enterprise, and beat others at their own game.
So the company you mentioned, Apple, has Foxconn as a subcontractor, and I believe they have over 1 million people that are employed over there. So I'll get back to the question asked by Geeta Mallikarjunan, which is what will be the fate of startups? I don't see any reason to believe in doom and gloom. All of you are innovative, all of you are nimble, agile. It might be more difficult for larger companies to move. That being said, money, angel investors and other kinds of investors may be a little more demanding, and they might take a lot more time. That's my first reaction. Harsh, any comment from you?
I'd agree with you on that. In fact, startups are simply there because larger corporations are not that agile or not that innovative. So startups would be all right. The only concern I have is in the short term, there might be, because of risk aversity, there would be constraints in terms of funding to some extent. But I would imagine that as things settle down, this will also start going away, because at the end of the day, there is a lot of money supply globally, which will have to find places to invest. So in the beginning, yes, there will be issues, and right now the current startups may have funding sources becoming a challenge, or more funding rounds becoming a challenge. Mohan is a greater expert at this than I am, but that is my view. But the fact that they have the innovation and the business model and the opportunity is really what's made them successful.
Thank you. There's a question for me from Mr. Mahendra Chauhan. He says, do you see this phase as deglobalization? Maybe in the short term, but I don't think so, because every single country has its own pluses and has its own minuses. If you see what is going on, there's a lot more of onshoring that's going on, because people don't want to be so dependent on China. But they also, when they came out of China after Mr. Trump's tariffs, they also moved into Southeast Asia. I think these supply chains have a value, and people go to different countries because there are advantages in being in certain countries. It could be the markets, it could be raw materials. In the end, I believe that it will lead to a more globalized world. I think we will all realize that we are far more dependent on each other. We can't do things without each other. And so I see this as short-term deglobalization, as people may be moving out of China to some extent, but it's a one-way street. We are going to get closer to one another going forward. Any comments, Mohan?
Is he on mute?
You're on mute again.
I agree with you. Sanjay. I think China will see an outflow of strategic reasons. It will go somewhere else. And it means that the supply from other countries to the Western world will increase. Technology flows to the Western world to these countries will increase. Will they come back to the Western world? No. Many of the people there don't even have the skills. They've forgotten the industry. Can you imagine textiles will come to America again? Never. So we'll think Apple manufacturing will come there? Never. So I think it'll go to other countries. There will be a reordering of the global order. And Sanjay, one important fact is, when China opened up, they put into play maybe 500 million people, that much of labor to create that manufacturing for the world. Now, there is no other country, if people ship from China, to get 100, 200 million people. The whole of Southeast Asia, if more investment come, they'll be full up. I mean, Vietnam is only 65, 70 million people. The other countries are smaller. And Indonesia is not such a competitive economy. Malaysia is very small. So I think it's a great opportunity for India to be the next China in a very different way, where we look at higher technology, we look at a greater scale, we look at greater productivity, and become a major supplier to the whole world and improve our economy. So I think, remember this, China labor cost has gone up. It's very, very high now. And I think that will impact China. China will move away from many things. And I think this is something that we must factor in.
Mr. Singhania?
I'll just say that I was at 3-4 days ago, I happened to attend a webinar where Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee was saying, clearly said that despite all the protectionist stances being taken by the country, he still believes that globalization is not going to go away. Of course, there may be some changes in patterns, but this was his feeling. I won't go beyond what he said.
Okay. Quite a large number of our local management associations also are on the call. There's one question from Ms. Chaya Sehgal. She is the president of the Bombay Management Association. What are your thoughts on shifting from GDP to a more realistic and pro-sustainability indicator like GPI, which is Genuine Progress Indicator? This is the first time I've heard of GPI, but maybe the others have. So what is your view on using GPI to measure our prosperity? Mohan?
Hey, Sanjay, that's a good question. A good question. I'll answer it very differently. Sanjay, for the last 45 days, many of us are now breathing in fresh air.
Yeah.
We're seeing a blue sky. The Ganges seem to have cleaned up. Even in Delhi, the Yamuna seems to have clean water. And I think this is remarkable. Now, if this continues for the next 15 days, we don't want to see this kind of a bad air, bad water come back again. So I think we will all start demanding a Clean Air Act, as happened in the UK after 1952. And I think sustainability and environment will have a much bigger impact on the world. All around the world, in China, in Europe, and in the US, the air has become fresher. People are becoming, people are becoming more healthier. And suddenly people are realizing for this COVID virus, the people who are dying are the people who have been breathing in bad air. The lungs are bad. People who are morbid, people who are obese, people who got diabetes and other things. So the fact that bad air can impact your health and longevity, your immunity comes down. And the fact that you don't have to live with bad air because of the shutdown means that all around the world, there'll be an increased demand from citizens. And I think sustainability and all of the indicators will become much, much more important. The last point, Sanjay, I'm just reading that major airlines are giving back the old aircraft.
Yeah.
30-year-old aircraft, they're giving it back because they're accelerating the write-off. They're supposed to give it back maybe 3 years later, but they're giving it back now because they want modern fleets. So I think demand for this will come up. And I think there is hope now that there'll be much cleaner environment, more focus on the environment. So let's keep our fingers crossed, but we must demand. If that happens, all these reporting, these calculations will be more important.
Yeah. Mr. Singhania?
Well, again, as I said, this is quite a novel, instead of novel coronavirus, this is a novel index.
Indicator.
And I really don't know, but I don't know whether we really have a better index than GDP at this point globally. Of course, Bhutan has the Global Happiness Index or something like that. They measure. So everybody can do their own. But I think the point that Mohan made is significant. I mean, I may not feel that we will, change our bad ways, so as to say. But clearly, I think there is a greater consciousness which would remain to say sustainability is important. So other indices apart from GDP is the point I'm making, which might become important, or an index is coined where you have economic activity along with the quality of life, and let's see where it goes.
Okay. One last question. This is from Binay Agarwal to everyone. Do you see a behavioral change in expenditure and infrastructure capex gets less priority? I mean, you're talking about behavioral change. Mohan, you just spoke about fresh air and everything else, and most of us may not want to go to the office. And infra capex, there's going to be a metro line is about 400 meters away from my house. And I really don't know whether we'll see that much infrastructure, that much spending going forward if a lot of people work from home and don't have to go to the office for their jobs. But any other comments from either of you?
No, I think behavioral change will happen everywhere, because like we discussed, 25-30% of people will work from home, and people will be cautious because suddenly they're faced with the prospect of lesser income, they're faced with a prospect of greater competition, and they're faced with mortality. Sanjay, people are scared of their lives. And people will become more healthy, hopefully. They want to live longer. They'll want fresh air. And many people may retire and think that they want to repurpose their life instead of just working and slogging it out 24 hours a day, traveling 10 days a month, running here, running there, using technology. They may want to change their lifestyle and change what they want to do. So I think it's premature, but I think this will have a big impact on infrastructure. People will be cautious about spending capital. They will want greater returns. They will want greater liquidity in the business. Right, Sanjay? Now, wouldn't you want greater liquidity, cash in the bank? You want to cut down your borrowings, put more cash. And what will you do? First, cut capital expenditure, or slog your capital more, sweat your capital to get greater returns, make marginal investments. So I think it is going to hurt. That's why we need government to step in and put money into infrastructure so that the capex in the economy does not sink and become negative.
Yeah, someone has said, should the world be locked down for 15 days every year? I don't know. Maybe we would like 15 days every month. Mr. Singhania, any question? Any comment? I mean,
I think there will certainly be some behavioral change, but I'm a bit skeptical as to how long we will continue with all this stuff. We had 2008, we had other things also, and the world has gone back to the same bad world in many ways. Not entirely, but in many ways. But I think the shorter duration, the change will be that people are definitely going to be far more conscious and cautious about not only the environment aspect, but even on an economic standpoint, And I think there's one other factor that we must, at least I think we should keep in mind, that once the lockdown is lifted, it is not that life is going to get back to, suddenly normal. It's not like we were asleep and we wake up and there is sunshine the next day. Because I would imagine that one of the threats that is being talked about globally is when people again start moving, there can be way. And also, therefore, I think certain things like social distancing, certain things or certain precautions, I think will continue for a much longer time, even after this COVID, the lockdown is open. So maybe some of those things may ingrain habits in us uh, for a longer period. But I think that there will be some change from the point of view of people being much more conscious across stratas of society. So it's not just the informal people who really are seeing an existential threat at this time, but even people like you and me, we may be conscious in our own spending. We will be conscious in terms of cautious about our you know operations, business operations. People are going to be a bit more uh, debt averse. On one hand, people may go back to a little more savings, etc. So there will be changes. As far as infrastructure is concerned, I would believe that a country like India, which is growing, will need the infrastructure as planned. Of course, there will be a greater emphasis on the way it is done, on more sustainable and greener ways of transport and people, commuting and doing things. So there will be those kinds of changes. But I want to make one other point, which is beyond this question, really. Mohan really talked about, support on infrastructure spend, absolutely right. But I want to, before we close the meeting, re-emphasize that the real money from government support has to come in terms of money in the hands of people to spend. Because unless we can kickstart and bring the confidence of people's, the demand side, all of us on this webinar as management people could talk about all kinds of possibilities. But unless people spend, nothing in the economy will work. So really, the way I view it, the whole thing has to start from the front end. The confidence in people to spend, the financial ability to spend, and then flow backwards from there into your entire chain of distribution, etc., transport, your own operations, and then going down to the MSMEs and suppliers and whoever else there are.
thank you. Well, once again, we've overshot our time, but I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. On behalf of AIMA, I'd like to thank the audience for their questions as well as their participation in the second session of AIMA's Leader Speak series. All the questions were relevant. Thank you, Mr. Singhania. Thank you, Mr. Pai. I hope that all of you who participated and asked questions were happy with our answers. Tomorrow, we will have AIMA's third Leader Speak session between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. on managing a post-COVID world. Mr. Suresh Prabhu, India's Sherpa to the G20 and Member of Parliament Rajya Sabha, will address and interact with the participants. I shall be moderating the session, and I hope all of you will be able to join us tomorrow. Thank you very much once again on behalf of AIMA. And
President, for conducting the session very, very, very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the recording of this session will be available on the AIMA website. So you can always refer to that.
Thanks all.
Thank you.